Okay, by now you should have created a couple of websites or some web pages. You should have an understanding of some basic HTML. So by this stage, you should be wanting to add some images and think about your design of your pages. So I thought I'd take you through how to create images using Photoshop, a little bit about screen resolution, creating rollover images, that sort of thing, thinking about color, font size, font style, usage of text, all those sorts of things. So I'm in Photoshop at the moment. So the first thing to consider when you're starting to design images or starting to think about layouts of your pages is to consider display size. So if we're coming into Photoshop, just be aware that you've got screen resolution versus print resolution. So when we're talking about screen resolution, we're talking about if we come into our presets, if we're making a new file in Photoshop, we've got web presets. So if we go and have a look at any of the web presets, these are basically your standard screen sizes for web. 640 by 480, all the way up to 1600 by 1200. So, but it's also worth considering how this actually looks. So, for example, if you're not sure what these kinds of sizes mean or what kind of monitor display settings you're working with, quickest way to check, right click on your desktop and choose properties, and we can see in here that we can come into settings. At the moment I've got my resolution set to 1280 by 960, which is actually not as far as it'll go. Usually I have it a bit higher because it's a widescreen monitor, the one that I'm using right now, but the video shoots that I'm creating for you guys, higher resolution tends to make it drop frames, so I've brought it down slightly and made it square rather than widescreen. But you can see here that I've got 1280 by 960. I can obviously take it down lower than that, or go a little bit higher than that. If we're wondering what kind of size of resolution to work, to design our site for, and design our pages for, particularly when we're talking about buttons and banners, then first of all we want to consider our users. So how do we know what kind of monitor our users are going to be looking at our site on? Well, we can come into something like w3schools.com and look at browser display statistics. There's a couple other sites around, but W3 Schools seems to be one of the better ones and one of the most current. And we can see here that in January 2010, pretty much no one uses 640 by 480 as a screen resolution anymore. 1% on 800 by 600, 20% on 1024 by 768, and most people are using higher than that. So, in terms of creating something that, in terms of your resolution, you probably don't need to worry about uh, making anything that's low end anymore. Probably don't even need to support 800 by 600 if you want to. You'd still want to support 1024 by 768 as your minimums. That means that any graphics you create, I would be trying to err on a little bit of the side of caution in that they should be displayable in about this resolution, but you can make them so that they scale higher than that on a screen and still look nice on a higher resolution. What do I mean by that? There's a couple other sites I'm going to show you guys, and I'll put these links to these addresses somewhere with this video. Obviously, there's a couple other pages that Web Developers Notes that talks about screen resolution. They've got slightly different statistics, and again, this one only gives us 800 by 600, but it's pretty much telling us a similar kind of idea here. This is saying if probably 3 or 4% are using 800 by 600, and that's Web Developers Notes. There's web design and screen resolution at Zield.com, which is really just a results kind of site, telling us what kind of resolutions we're working for, and also to remind us that being aware that some people aren't just looking on standard monitors anymore. They're looking on mobile device. They're watching and viewing content on mobile devices and things like iPads. So you can't, even though you might be able to get away with not supporting 800 by 600 or 640 by 480 anymore. If you're going to design a site that is going to view from, display well for mobile devices, you are actually going to need to go, probably about half that realistically. So you've got to take those sorts of things into consideration. The last one, which is obviously quite out of date now. So in terms of the kinds of resolutions you have to support, probably not as relevant, but in terms of the kind of considerations you should take into account, still very much relevant. This is Jacob Nielsen's useIt.com, and he's one of the main gurus on usability design. So he's right up there in terms of knowing, what people should be doing to make websites and other kinds of content usable for the audience and for the viewer or for the user. So here he's saying optimize for 1024 by 768. Obviously, that was 2006, so we could potentially talk about something higher by now. But here he's saying optimize for your main users, but still supply support for those lower end users. So optimize it so that it's for the main resolution, which in this case we're talking about. You might optimize it for something higher than 1024 by 768. We can't know what all these higher ones necessarily are, so I still tend to try and support 1024 by 768 as much as possible when I'm designing my graphics. So just something to keep in mind. Certainly in terms of any graphics like banners and things, I wouldn't make them any wider than 1024, just in case there's somebody viewing a page at that resolution. It means that any of my graphics aren't going to get cut off on the edge there. So if I'm wanting to design a banner or something along those lines, I can come into my new, and obviously I can choose my web. If I'm going to do something that's, say, 1024, which is 1024 wide by 768 high, then that's my whole site. So if I'm going to design, so let's just go and do that anyway, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So assume this is my web page. And particularly when you're coming up to designing your site, sometimes it's worth even just making, a whole page in something like Photoshop, doing a mock-up, or even just doing a sketch. It doesn't have to be on Photoshop. I guess the advantage of doing it in something like Photoshop is that you have actual dimensions that are based on pixels, so we know exactly how that would look for a user, and we can also make it that size, put it on our desktop background or blown up as a large image, drop our monitor resolution back down again in properties, see what it looks like if we view it on 1024 by 768, how big it is. So we could actually do that if we wanted to, just to get a feel for the size of our images if we make them for that kind of web page size, or for that kind of display size for that monitor. So that's what a 124 by 768 would look like. So obviously if I'm going to make a banner graphic, I don't want it to be wider than 1024. Usually I try to make my graphics separately. So if I was going to make a new, say, banner, I might make a custom one that's, maybe 1,000, and maybe make the height something like 200 or 300. So I would probably, if it's 768 height, I don't want it to take up more than about that top sort of quarter to a fifth of the page. I don't want it to have my top banner taking up half or a third of the page. That's going to take up too much screen real estate. I want room for my content. So I'd probably think about if 768 is my height, then a quarter of that is going to be about 200 or a little bit less anyway. So I would say start off with 150, 200, see what that looks like. You might want to drop it down to even something like 100. So just to get a sense of it, I might do 150. So there's what a top banner, the kind of size I might make my top banner as. So that's just to give you a sense of different display sizes. The next couple of shoots will focus on actually creating decent graphics, thinking about complementary colours, and also starting to look at buttons.